Welcome to the Wolverine.com podcast, the Maize and Blue Breakdown. I am Clayton Sayfie with my known friend and trusted agent, Austin Fox from the Wolverine.com. Check out our content at the Wolverine.com, promo code Blue60. You get 60 days of our premium content for free. Austin, is Thursday, January 28th. Not a lot going on right now in Michigan athletics, considering it is paused for up to 14 days, up to February 7th, which gives us a little extra time. Like last night, we would have been covering the Michigan-Penn State game, and I would gladly have, rather been covering that. But I'm watching Big Ten hoops. I'm watching the Penn State-Ohio State game, which was a good game. I'm watching Wisconsin-Maryland. I'm reading things. I'm on Twitter. I'm looking at this stock thing. It's fascinating what's going on right now. What have you been playing ping pong, or are we back to? It kind of feels like a mini like last spring type of thing when we really, everyone in the country just had to figure out, other things to do, especially with sports shut down. What have you been up to the last couple days here?
It's funny that you bring up ping pong because that was actually the first thing that I was going to bring up today as well. I have been playing a ton of ping pong lately. We've had a lot of time on our hands lately this past spring when not much was going on. I think we all kind of started doing activities that we don't normally do. I was playing ping pong like crazy. I had mentioned a long time ago that I memorized the map of Europe. So that just goes to show you how much time I had on my hands. I've been playing a lot of ping pong lately with some outstanding Westphalia players, Grant Renee Drusty, Matt Myers, Jason and Kevin Fox. So it's been a blast. If you're looking to play ping pong, those are the people you want to hit up. They're some of the best players that I know. I've been watching a lot of college basketball lately too. You talked about last night's games, Wisconsin, Maryland, Penn State, Ohio State. Watching college basketball around the country is so much more fun to do when Michigan is elite and near the top of the sport, and that's exactly where they are right now. So even though things have slowed down a little bit lately, it is kind of nice to be doing some of these fun activities again that you don't normally do in a regular year.
I agree with you on the watching overall college basketball, like watching Baylor or at least, keeping an eye on a score here or there. Because I much prefer the Big Ten. Like I'll watch basically any Big Ten game over another game, unless it's like a top 10, top 15 type matchup with, if it's like Kansas, Baylor or something like that. Then I'll watch that over maybe like a Northwestern game or something like that. But when you look at the top of college basketball, it is much more exciting when the team you either cover or follow is up there, because it has ramifications on seeding, and you want to see how good is Michigan, how deep of a run can they make. And I will say Baylor is a heck of a team and is incredible. I mean, they were up like 38-5 or something like that on Kansas State super early. I think they scored like 100 points last night. So craziness, but it does make it so much more entertaining, and that's why at least it softens the blow a little bit that Michigan, like it's tough that they're paused and they're so good, and this could kind of derail the season, and we can get into that a little bit. But it is a little more entertaining to watch the other college basketball. So it's kind of a pick your poison there, give and take type of thing. But and also this 10 years ago yesterday, Stu Douglas hits his shot against Michigan State at the Breslin Center. That got me reminiscent. I was watching some highlights from that game as well to keep me occupied. Zach Novak went off in that game as well. Changed the trajectory of the Michigan basketball program. Really did. If you look at, John Beilein said this before, if you look at the record after that shot, after that game, it's phenomenal. And then you can even, people on the message board were bringing up some other games where if you look at after the Illinois game where they were called white collar, if you look at the record after that, it's phenomenal. So it changed the trajectory. Did you reminisce on that at all? Did you see the 10-year anniversary of what was a crazy, awesome win for Michigan?
I sure did. Yeah, I saw a lot of it on Twitter. Michigan strength and conditioning coach John Sanderson retweeted it. Zach Novak retweeted it with an awesome caption. So you're spot on when you say that it did change the course of Michigan basketball. Michigan was 1-6 in Big Ten play at that time of that game in 2011, and then they finished the year hot, made the NCAA tournament, and they've made the NCAA tournament every single year since. with the exception of 2015. They've won 2 Big Ten regular season titles during that time. They've won 2 Big Ten tournament titles, been to 2 national titles. So the stretch that Michigan basketball has been on since that game is incredible, and in a lot of ways it changed the course of that rivalry as well. That win, it started a stretch of 6 out of 8 victories against Michigan State and Tom Izzo for Michigan at the time of that game. And Michigan State had owned the rivalry prior to that. So props to John Beilein and props to the guys on that Michigan team who changed the culture back then. Zach Novak, Stu Douglas, Jordan Morgan are a few of the names that come to mind right away. And Juwan Howard is carrying on that culture that we're seeing with this year's team. You mentioned that Illinois blowout loss in 2017 as well, when Maverick Morgan called Michigan white collar. And that kind of served as a wake-up call as well. Michigan's record since 2017 has been incredible as well. So it is so much fun to reminisce and look back at what's all transpired over the last 10 years or so since Michigan did beat Michigan State and East Lansing back in 2011.
Yeah, it's crazy. And the Beilein era resurrected. And then, yeah, like we said, you have the lull in like 2015, 2016, another semi-resurrection of the program. And then they go to, they win the Big Ten tournament in 17, go to the Sweet 16, obviously inches away there from advancing. 2018, you go to the national title game. 2019, you have, I think, the most wins in a regular season for Michigan basketball of all time, go to the Sweet 16. Last year, Juwan Howard's first year was a team that I think had a lot of upside, especially in the postseason, if that ever got played. And then this year, where you're off to this stellar start. Which brings me to this, the next 4 games are listed as postponed for Michigan. I would not bet that any of those get played, seeing as the Big Ten has now scheduled games for Michigan State on February 6th. Penn State played Ohio State last night. That was originally supposed to be Michigan. So, in the shutdown lasts up to 14 days. But I think this is going to have huge ramifications on this basketball team going forward, considering they're not able to practice right now. They're not able to meet in person. They're not able to lift weights. I'm sure John Sanderson has them doing some aerobics and things like that in their apartments or whatever, but it's just not the same. And this is unprecedented when you think of the history of really Michigan basketball or college basketball, to have 2 weeks off of not just some guys out and limited workouts and things like that, like you're seeing with Michigan State, who's kind of paused for a little bit, but has pressed on and done some things and quarantined some guys. This is the entire team. And, thank God and knock on wood that, none of them are actually, have the virus right now. But your thoughts on maybe the ramifications of this team, because to me, this looks like the Big Ten title favorite. I still would put them there. I said this on our other show the other day with our colleague Chris Ballas, and I said that I don't think Michigan will win the Big Ten anymore. I think that this is going to be a thing where they are, going to be a little rusty coming off this break, and it's going to cost them a few games, possibly down the stretch. I think they can get back up to speed by March, but I think it's going to cost them a few games. I would still say Michigan's the favorite, but I would take the field right now, whether that's Wisconsin or Iowa or somebody else, to win the Big Ten. And that's kind of a shame because they were such a clear-cut favorite and still really are the clear-cut favorite. But who knows what's going to happen with just how this affects this team.
Yeah, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but back in 2018 when the Big Ten tournament was pushed up a week early and Michigan won it, they had a 2-week layoff after that.
Yeah.
The NCAA tournament, correct?
No, you're right. But they were able to practice, in scrimmage. So I did think of that, though, too, how I was trying to think, has there ever been anything like this? That would be the only comparable thing, but it's never been like this. You've never not been able to practice or scrimmage or meet or watch film all together in person. I mean, technically right now, I don't even think they're supposed to go to a local gym, because if you look at the wording of that release, it says quarantine/isolation, effective immediately. And maybe those are recommendations. I think recommendations a lot of times these days now mean mandates or whatever. So I wonder what they're really doing. And I wouldn't blame them. And at the same time, then you can go into the argument, is it safer to, have them outside of the building and at their local YMCA or whatever? But, not to go there, I guess. I think this is much, much different than the 2-week layoff without games there. And then they came out and they were a little rusty against Montana, right? But then obviously they got it going a little bit and then beat Houston that weekend in 2018. But this is totally different. Am I wrong?
No, no. In fact, I was agreeing with you. Because of how rusty Michigan
Okay.
did come out in 2018 after that layoff. That Montana win in the NCAA tournament was flat out ugly. And even though they did beat Houston in the second round, that was an ugly game as well. And Michigan did not play well that night. So the layoff then had major ramifications, even though it didn't wind up costing Michigan. Came incredibly close, and I think this one will as well. You look at Michigan's schedule when they're going to pick back up on February 11th, and it's the heart of the schedule. Their first 4 games after the layoff are Illinois, at Wisconsin, Rutgers, at Ohio State. So that's about as tough a stretch as you can get. I think Michigan is bound to lose a few games after this layoff. I would be very surprised if they're playing at the same level that they were prior to this shutdown. So the question really is, how many games will Michigan lose, and will it be enough to still win the Big Ten title? Another big question for me is how the Big Ten is going to handle the Big Ten regular season title when considering not everybody is going to play the same amount of games. I think a few teams will play 20 conference games. Some may only play 18. Some may only play 16. I believe Michigan is currently on pace to only play 16, and I don't see how all 4 postponements get made up. So do you give the Big Ten regular season champion the team with the best winning percentage? I think that it may come down to that. So I do think Michigan will still win the Big Ten regular season title, but I completely understand when you say that you would take the field over Michigan right now.
Yeah, and you brought it up when you look down the schedule. Illinois at Wisconsin versus Rutgers at Ohio State, and then you go at Indiana versus Iowa, and then at Michigan State to close things off. They're not going to practice until 4 days before that Illinois game. Will that even be able to be played? I mean, I would assume Juwan Howard would, feel he can at least get his guys in game shape again, quote unquote, and get them, back to the swing of things. But I don't think, and they'll never admit this, but I don't think they're going to be totally ready to go and actually necessarily win that game. I wouldn't rule it out. But then look at this, Austin. So how are they going to reschedule those games? The point you bring up, they kind of did this with Penn State, who had a long break. And again, it was different because they had some guys in limited workouts and just other guys in contact tracing and stuff like that. Not a total shutdown of the entire team for this extended of a period of time. How are they going to reschedule those? They had Penn State playing games like every other day for a little mini stretch there, or one every 3 days. They might squeeze some of these games in, and that makes every game harder. Not only, would it make the games against Indiana, Penn State, Northwestern, Michigan State tougher because you're playing on shorter rest, but then we're talking about these games during that gauntlet, the Illinois, Wisconsin, Rutgers, Ohio State, where you're playing games. I mean, you could look at it like this. They'll be back up to speed because, they won't have too much rust, but are they going to have their legs? That's another question. How will that affect them going into the postseason in the Big Ten tournament and the NCAA tournament? Who knows? I mean, this is unprecedented times, uncharted waters. When you look at Penn State and what they did to them, it's not going to have really an impact on Penn State in the NCAA tournament because they're not going to get there. But for Michigan, this is an interesting case study, I guess, fascinating story. And who the heck knows how it's really going to happen and how the Big Ten will reschedule. Will they reschedule? You hope they do in a way so Michigan can get those games in that were stripped from them. But at the same time, how is that going to affect the rest of this race? And that's why I think Michigan won't win the Big Ten. And I hate to say that only because this is a team that looks like the best team in the Big Ten and has played the best in the Big Ten. But, reasons outside of their control look like they could derail this season. It's a sad reality. And I don't want to depress people with this, but it's just, when you look at that schedule, when you look at what's postponed and what could happen, it looks like reality at this point.
Yeah, I think you're just saying that because overall you're a pessimist when it comes to Michigan athletics. But
I'm an optimist.
That was a joke, people. For anybody who doesn't know, Clay Dog, he's the absolute opposite. So I think that's just reality, what you just said. You look at Michigan's schedule from February 11th till the end of the regular season, and there are no big gaps in between each of their final 7 games or whatever it is after this layoff. So if they want to make up some of these postponements, they're really going to have to squeeze them in tightly. I don't think they would play a game after the Michigan State regular season finale in between the Big Ten tournament. So again, I don't see any way that all 4 of these postponements get made up. We just don't know how this layoff is going to affect Michigan. We've seen teams who have been laid off for a bit in the past not really be impacted by it, and then we've seen major negative effects. The 2006 and 2012 Detroit Tigers come to mind. I know we're switching gears here and switching sports, but they swept the 2012 ALCS and the 06 ALCS and had a long layoff prior to the World Series, and then they wound up playing terrible in both World Series after being on fire. So usually a long layoff is not a good thing after you're playing hot and you're a hot team overall. But man, I just feel like this group is so connected and has the right mindset and the right mentality and is very mature. And I think they will be able to get back to at least a similar level. It may wind up costing them a Big Ten title if they drop a few games, but I think you've been saying this as well. If they can at least get their legs back under them and get back into game speed prior to the NCAA tournament, that's obviously what really matters. And I think that's when we could see this Michigan team clicking again come March.
We sound like fearmongers in a way because you're mentioning these examples. If you go back to 2018 Michigan that we've talked about, and then the Tigers that you just mentioned, they all got to practice in between. They weren't barred from going to the building that they practice in, and that's scary at this point. But I agree that they will get back to that level, and I think it will be before they have to go to, it looks like it could be Indianapolis for the Big Ten tournament right now scheduled in Chicago, but there's speculation it may move, and I hope it does because Indy is 10,000 times better than Chicago for the Big Ten tournament. But yeah, it may cost them the Big Ten regular season, but it may just, I don't know. I mean, someone was bringing up the argument that maybe they needed some of this rest to get through everything. I don't know. It's the rest versus rust type debate that has really never been settled. But at the same time, like I've been saying, it's different because they can't do anything. It's not just that they don't have games. So I think that's what makes this thing kind of fascinating. When you look at the rest of the Big Ten, though, looking at the standings, Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois, Ohio State, those kind of feel like the next teams hanging around behind Michigan. And then you get a little bit of a drop off with kind of those middle tier with Purdue, Minnesota, Indiana, Rutgers. And then you have kind of that, teams that have potential to beat anyone on any given night with Michigan State, Maryland, Northwestern, even Penn State. And then there's Nebraska. They're in a tier all by themselves. But when you look at this, the rest of the Big Ten here, who would be the favorite for you to win this thing? Because I'm going to go with Wisconsin over Iowa because we've seen Iowa, they have no defense. I don't know how Fran McCaffrey's been coaching this long and he doesn't know how to coach a defense. I know the athletes they have are good, but they're not necessarily those like elite guys that are going to shut you down. Who would your favorite behind Michigan be to close out the regular season here and actually come away with the title and steal it from the Wolverines?
You and I agree on a lot of things usually, but I'm in complete disagreement on this one. I would go Iowa in a heartbeat. I think you have to point to Iowa. They're in second place right now in the conference. I think they're clearly the second best team in the conference, several notches ahead of Wisconsin with all the weapons that they have. And for the most part, they have been incredibly consistent so far this year. They did lose that home game to Indiana in a pretty big upset last Thursday, but that's really been one of the few bad games that they've played this year. The reason I'm not high on Wisconsin is because of the way they've been playing lately. We've seen some major weaknesses for them. Michigan obviously destroyed them. It's been a while, but Maryland beat them at the Kohl Center. Ohio State really took it to them at the Kohl Center this past Saturday. So I'm starting to think that Wisconsin simply is not as good as we once thought. Illinois is kind of in that same boat. We've seen them drop some games lately that they probably shouldn't. Ohio State in Champaign last Saturday. Speaking of Ohio State, unfortunately, I think they're one of Michigan's primary contenders for that Big Ten title. They didn't play that well last night against Penn State, but they're heating up and they're 13-4 overall now. They've won at Wisconsin and at Illinois recently, so I would peg Ohio State and Iowa as two of Michigan's primary contenders for that Big Ten title moving forward.
I think Wisconsin's schedule is slightly easier, and they play each other, Wisconsin and Iowa, twice coming up, and that may decide, I guess, who would either be second or who would, take it from Michigan. Obviously, the games that they each play against Michigan coming up will also be big. Wisconsin against Michigan at home, but I don't know. I mean, and Wisconsin has to play Illinois 2 times. Nobody's schedule is easy, but I don't know. Maybe it's just me, like the bias of looking back at last year and seeing what Wisconsin did to close out the year with basically the same group. But I think Chris Ballas said it best the other day on our other show was Iowa gonna Iowa. And that loss against Indiana, I don't think it's the last time we're going to see that, just because Indiana starts locking them down last week and they go on a scoring drought. Well, they can't stop anyone ever. So there you go. It was like a huge run for Indiana in that second half. So I don't know. There's just something about me that I'm going to trust like the more consistent product, which Wisconsin has been for basically my entire lifetime, over Iowa, who I think is a great team and has potential to certainly win it. And, I wouldn't be shocked at all if it's them over Wisconsin or, whatever. But I don't know. I'm going to go with the consistent product at this point.
Okay. Tune in this Friday night at 9 p.m., folks, if you want to see a game that will potentially shake up the Big Ten standings. Iowa at Illinois at 9 Eastern time this Friday. That's going to be a massive game in regards to the Big Ten standings. You mentioned that Iowa's going to Iowa in Chris Ballas's words, and I do think that's spot on because usually they do. But I think this is different because I think they can afford to lose a few games moving forward and potentially still win the Big Ten title. I wouldn't be surprised if the champion still winds up having 5 conference losses, and that includes Michigan when they return. I wouldn't be surprised to see them drop 4 more games yet, especially if some of those postponements get made up. Iowa already has 2 conference losses, so again, only losing 3 more wouldn't surprise me one bit. So yeah, again, I would still say Iowa is Michigan's primary contender, and that game on March 4th at Chrysler Center could potentially be for the Big Ten title. I know people have been saying the Michigan State finale in the regular season would be as well, but unfortunately, I don't think Tom Izzo's Spartans are going to be quite in contention this year. They got a big one tonight at Rutgers, though, at 7 o'clock, so I'm sure the nation will be tuning into that one, man. MSU at Rutgers, don't want to miss that one. But, yeah, I would keep an eye on Iowa moving forward as Michigan's biggest threat.
Are they going to let the MSU seniors kiss the floor on senior night when Michigan's there? Because we're in the middle of a pandemic here.
Yeah, that tradition's way too dangerous, man. Can't be doing that these days. God forbid we have people kiss the floor. So I think they should just cut that tradition out altogether, and this is the perfect year to do it.
Yeah, I've never liked it either. They pause the entire game for it. I've never been a fan of that. But yeah, the dark horses to me, that is going to be a big game. Iowa, Illinois. Dark horses to me are Illinois, and you mentioned Ohio State having the chance to come in and steal the Big Ten title. Those are the 2 that could jump into that top tier of the Big Ten, I think, really quickly.
Yeah, and unfortunately, Ohio State's getting healthy. They got C.J. Walker, their veteran point guard, back recently, and he's playing now. E.J. Liddell had missed time a bit ago, but he's back as well. So, again, they're getting healthy, and they're playing well. They had that upset loss to Purdue at Value City Arena recently. But outside of that, I don't have their schedule in front of me. That seems like one of their few losses in recent games. So that Michigan trip to Columbus late in the year is going to be huge as well, I think, for Big Ten standings.
E.J. Liddell is a stud. We kind of saw flashes last year a little bit, but he is now. He's there.
Yeah, he is. He's only a sophomore, but this really isn't much of a surprise. He was a really, really big recruit out of high school. He was a pretty high 4-star, so I want to say he's only 6'6", if I'm not mistaken, but he's down there playing the 5 for them, oftentimes alongside Kyle Young, who's pretty undersized as well for a center. But yeah, he's turned into one of the better big men in the Big Ten, and what's a loaded crop of big men when considering you do have Hunter Dickinson and Luka Garza and Kofi Coburn, but E.J. Liddell isn't far behind those guys.
Yeah, I'm looking at he was the number 41 recruit in the country, 4-star, 6'7". It says on his Rivals profile, but yeah, he plays a lot bigger and he's long. He's has a huge wingspan. It'll be interesting to see Michigan against them, and Michigan against some of these opponents that we haven't seen them play, like the Iowas and the Illinois and the Ohio States. I can't wait for that. I can't wait for this team to get back to the hardwood, but obviously going to be fascinating to watch, and we'll see when that is, when exactly they do come back. Let's get to football a little bit, Austin, with some of the new hires as we wrap up. Just want to remind everyone this podcast is brought to you in part by JFQ Lending. With interest rates below 3%, there's never been a better time to lock in a low fixed interest rate on your mortgage. You'll never need to think about refinancing again. Set it and forget it. And with JFQ Lending, you're guaranteed to get the highest level of customer service. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and over 3,000 5-star reviews. Give Chris Sabanish a call today at 480-562-6267 or email him directly at csabanish@jfqlending.com. JFQ Lending Incorporated, equal access lender, licensed in over 40 states. www.jfqlending.com. Austin, football, making moves. Jim Harbaugh said he was going to evaluate everything this offseason, and it appears that he evaluated everything. Obviously, the biggest news was Ed Warner being out in this last week. Our Chris Ballas was the first to report that, and that Sharon Moore would be the co-offensive coordinator and offensive line coach. Ron Bellamy from West Bloomfield comes in as the wide receivers coach. Josh Gaddis stepping away from the receivers, just the offensive coordinator. They said he will also help Bellamy with the receivers. And there you go. Jay Harbaugh, 2 tight ends, where he coached in 2015 and 2016. He'll also be the special teams coordinator. I would imagine Bellamy will help a little bit with special teams. But man, what a shakeup. And I think the number one thing here is we continue to see the theme of younger, less proven, maybe higher upside. It's high risk, high reward. But Ed Warner, in my mind, is a phenomenal coach. I think it's a really, really big risk they're taking here with Sharon Moore, who's never coached offensive line. He was a very good offensive lineman at Oklahoma, but it's just different to actually coach that position. I will say my one takeaway, though, is having the O-line coach as the co-offensive coordinator, a guy that knows the linemen the best, which is, the most important position group outside of quarterback. He knows the linemen the best. He knows what they're good at, and maybe that'll have more input on the game plan because something had to change with that offense last year. Josh Gaddis, and that offense was flat out horrible at times, and I'm sure he knows it. Jim Harbaugh obviously knows it, and he was trying to bring in a lot of help for that offense and really had a chance to land. It looked like there was a chance they were going to land some of these big name guys that were on the market, but they go with this instead. And your thoughts on how it's going to pay off? I know we won't really know till they're on the field. We keep saying about these hires, but Sharon Moore is the offensive line coach. Who knows? He's got to learn a lot, and he's got to be able to do the things that I think Ed Warner does second nature in a way. At the same time, I think Sharon Moore is an outstanding coach and will be able to adjust and learn, and will be willing to do all that. But will it be enough to get back to the status that Ed Warner had that offensive line?
I don't really have a strong opinion on the staff shakeups that Jim Harbaugh made because you just summed it up perfectly. We really don't know, and nobody knows how it's going to shake out until we see this team on the field next fall. It was kind of a shame to see Ed Warner step away from the offensive line because he was one of the best coaches on the staff and it was nothing but a class act. But again, it's kind of in that pattern that Jim Harbaugh's been doing this offseason to get the staff a lot younger. Ron Bellamy is only 39 years old, the coach from West Bloomfield. Mike Hart is only 34 years old. He's just a few years older than me. So that goes to show you how young he is. But I think players will relate to these guys and really want to play for these guys. That's not to say they didn't relate to Ed Warner. and Mike Zordich and Don Brown, three coaches who are not going to hold the same positions, with Zordich and Brown being gone, and potentially Warner as well. But we've heard that perhaps some players didn't like Ed Warner's coaching style and that he was a little bit too hard on them and that they couldn't handle the tough criticism. And if that's the case, then those players need to go. So Sherrone Moore is going to hold guys accountable as well as co-offensive coordinator and offensive line coach. I don't think there's any question about that. I'll be interested to see how much of a role he has in this offense alongside Josh Gaddis, because like you said, Michigan's offense was flat out horrible last year. Josh Gaddis has not gotten the job done since he's been here, and if that's the case, then Sherrone Moore needs to have most of the reins for this offense and be calling the shots. Ben McDaniels was in a similar boat. Quarterback play was not good enough over the past few years. There was no excuse for Joe Milton to be as bad as he was this past year, so it doesn't break my heart seeing Ben McDaniels go. I'll be interested to see Jim Harbaugh coaching the quarterbacks now and what kind of a job he does. I think it's probably a good thing that Jim Harbaugh is going to be more hands-on with these quarterbacks in 2021. So yeah, I think it's a good thing that he shook up the staff as much as he did. We've heard that even the analysts and the grad assistants have been cleaned out as well, with the exception of Grant Newsome. So Jim Harbaugh said that he was going to evaluate everything under the hood this offseason, and by the sounds of it, that's exactly what he did and then some.
I love that Grant Newsome will be around still. He's still one of my all-time favorites.
He's got to be. That guy's as tough as it gets. I think that leg injury in 2016 on October 1st against Wisconsin was a lot worse than people realize, and it could have been very, very bad. And the fact that he's bounced back and is walking again and is living a normal life is a testament to him and is a credit to how tough he is.
He almost lost his leg, and he tried coming back a couple years later, I think in 2018.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, I think he actually lost more than his leg. I'll just leave it at that. But the fact that he considered playing a football again someday is incredible. Unfortunately, it didn't work out, but I think he has a future here in this Michigan program as a coach on this Jim Harbaugh staff.
Yeah, and beyond as a coach, I think he'll be another star that we could be talking about, not only at Michigan or but somewhere else. I think Ron Bellamy. So he's really the most recent addition to this staff, and I think both of us have talked to him and have interacted with him and observed his teams at West Bloomfield, covering some of these guys like Donovan Edwards. He is, I think, another guy that's like a rising star. I think he's going to be able to recruit what Detroit kid that already probably knows him with how involved he isn't going to want to play for him. So I think he's going to have a big impact there, but I think he'll have a big impact on the culture as well. How they, the cliche, you got to recruit your own guys as well. And guys like Ron Bellamy can do that. I think, guys like Mike Hart will certainly do that. They're going to hold you accountable, as you mentioned. So will Sherrone Moore, who's also a great culture guy. But like, you have to be able to relate. You have to be able to, Ed Warner knows exactly what an offensive lineman should do on every play, but if he can't get through to a guy, and I'm not saying this was happening, but if he can't get through to you and motivate you to want to do it right and correct every time, and same goes for Mike Zordich, and I'm not saying this was going on, but if they can't get through to you, and if that's what Jim Harbaugh evaluated that was going on, then you got to get somebody in that can get through to you and, because it doesn't matter what if you can't get through to the kid.
Right. Kids want to play for coaches that they can relate to nowadays, and coaches who aren't necessarily that much older than them. And Mike Hart and Mo Linguist and George Hilo and Ron Bellamy fit the bill. They want to talk to these coaches about stuff outside of football, what these guys did when they were in college and what kind of rap music they listen to and what they do in their spare time. And obviously guys like Hart and Bellamy can relate to kids like that. I spoke with former Indiana running back Morgan Ellison recently, who played for Mike Hart for the Hoosiers in 2017, and he said that he still has an outstanding relationship with Mike Hart nowadays, even though it's been 4 years since he played for him. The two talk on the phone. They talk about their families. They talk about life outside of football. He said Mike Hart really prepared for those Indiana running backs for life outside of football in regards to buying a house and getting married and investing wisely and handling your financial situation wisely. So That's the kind of guys that Michigan needs on this staff. Mike Hart just gets it. He's a Michigan man through and through. He knows what it takes to win at a high level here. He won a Big Ten title as a freshman in '04. He had Michigan on the verge of a national title appearance in 2006. So he just flat out gets it. And I think that that's going to pay dividends, and that's exactly what this Michigan coaching staff needs again.
Yeah, and I was talking to some high school coaches and stuff about Mike Hart in a story that we put up, and some of these guys, like when you hear about what it's really like to be recruited by Mike Hart, is like they were saying his allegiance is really to the relationship. Like he works for his program, but he wants what's best for the kid. He's recruited guys that aren't even running backs, and he makes sure that those guys are everything's going well for them. If they miss a class, like one coach told me, he'll call the coach and be like, "Hey man, he's missing class. Like, can you talk to him? I'm gonna send him into my office, whatever later." Like that type of stuff where it's more about the relationship than just him, transactional thing where what can you do for me? Like what can you do on the field? He wants that as well. He wants to win. Like you mentioned, he knows how to win. But it's about that as well. And when you hear about the broken culture this past season at Michigan, bringing in guys like this that have a track record of not only being high-level coaches, we've seen the track record a guy like Mike Hart has, but being guys that can maybe, mend the gap there a little bit in, what Jim Harbaugh wants in his culture and what it was. If you can tighten that gap a little bit and bring in guys that can do that, then I think the other stuff can take care of itself. And I think that's what he's going for here. It's certainly a risk to do all these moves and go with some more unproven guys. But I like the track record they have in their young careers, and I like the other stuff like the culture, and we'll see how it pays off. Certainly. Anything else on the new coaches here before we go?
Yeah, I actually spoke with Rashad Bateman's mom yesterday. LaShonda
Really?
Bateman. Yeah, Rashad Bateman obviously played receiver at Minnesota the last few years, and Mo Linguist was his primary recruiter to PJ Fleck in Minnesota. And the story has not hit the Wolverine.com quite yet, but stay on the lookout for that over the next week or two. And she raved about Linguist. And basically what we just said about Mike Hart and Ron Bellamy, the same thing fits Mo Linguist. He holds guys accountable. He's going to prepare them for life outside of football, and it's all about the relationships. And again, when you respect a position coach and you like him, you're going to play a lot harder for him. So I think that's another thing to be excited about here with this with these Michigan coaching staff shakeups.
No doubt. Look at you talking to Rashad Bateman's mom. Jeez.
Yeah, she was a joy. She was energetic, enthusiastic, and the praise for Mo Linguist was genuine. So that was good to hear. You can tell when someone's just BSing about someone, but that was not the case with LaShonda Bateman, a class act through and through.
And yeah, it's been a theme, everyone we've talked to about each and every one of these guys has been, it's been nothing but positives. And that does not mean it's going to work out, but it gives you a chance, and it's literally, I have not heard a bad word about any of these guys that are coming in. And I think that says a lot. At the same time, we got to see how it plays out, and we will next fall, but we'll continue to talk about the new shakeups. It looks like now the recruiting department and the analysts, like you talked about earlier, may be next, and we'll talk about all those moves as well if and when they come. So, and they'll all be at thewolverine.com. You can use the promo code BLUE60 for 2 months for free. That is our show. We'll see you next week.